Okay, good afternoon everybody. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for coming along to listen to the very interesting topic of temporary traffic management. It's a field that has grown in importance over the past few years because of legislation, because of court cases and because of accidents. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Colm Kieran. I'm from a company called CHM Group. And CHM have been at the forefront of traffic management over the past 10 years in Ireland. Personally, I've been involved with CHM for the past 4 years, and I'm here today to speak to you about where temporary traffic management exists within Ireland today. In order to do that, I want to give you a bit of a context for where temporary traffic management has come from in recent years. So I'll do that by just giving you a bit of a story about my own experience within the industry. I graduated from civil engineering, and my first day on site, I was brought back down to earth. I was the big man, I was the graduate straight out of college, and I was given a stop-go board to look after for the day. Not what I was expecting, but lo and behold, here I am, and temporary traffic management is now my area of expertise. And I remember that day on site, I was being supervised by an engineer from New Zealand. I always remember his name, Ruben Rink. And he told me that if I was doing this job in New Zealand, I'd have to be trained to hold the stop-go board. I'd have to use a traffic management plan in order to do the roadworks, and whoever was doing the temporary traffic management plan would have to be trained. I received no training. If there was a temporary traffic management plan, it was done on the back of a cigarette box, and I certainly didn't see it. So, in fairness to the industry, it has come a long way. Here we are, 2010. There's training for people on site. There's training for designers, and there's standards to keep to. So I'm going to introduce what's happening in 2010 and into 2011 and what we should be expecting from the industry. Just a bit of housekeeping. If anybody wants to ask questions, we'll leave them to the end, but I'll also be available here directly afterwards, but also down at the stand if anybody wants to ask any questions. So the overview of the presentation. I'm going to talk about the industry codes of practice and the changes to them in 2010, but also our observations from the delivery of a traffic management design course, which some of you here, I recognise some of the faces, have attended over the past 18 months. What we've learned about the industry by giving this design course in terms of the issues facing local authorities and contractors throughout Ireland. So why has temporary traffic management become so important? Well, there's two things really. The road worker has to be provided with a safe working area, but the travelling public must also be allowed to travel on a route which is safe to travel on, but also to minimise the disruption to the traffic as they travel on these routes. The legislation which covers it, we have Chapter 8 of the Traffic Signs Manual, and then we have the Guidance for the Control and Management of Traffic at Roadworks. So just as some of you might be aware, that's a new edition of this guidance document. It was released 2 weeks ago on the 5th of October, and it has a lot more guidance within it now. We'll talk about that over the next couple of minutes. But that's available for download on the Department of Transport's website. We then also have the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work Act, and that's the act that protects you as an employee, whether you're an office worker, a road worker, or maybe even a farmer. Then we have the Road Traffic Act. Then we have the various different roads acts then, which also govern the area of temporary traffic management. That slide there, if that was the only slide that I could show you today and PowerPoint broke down, that's where we are today in Ireland. So the environment for temporary traffic management, I'm going to split it up into two sections. On this side here we have the Road Traffic Act and the various roads acts. And on this side here we have the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work Act. Combining those two sections together, we get the environment in which temporary traffic management exists. From the Roads Act and the Road Traffic Act, we have Chapter 8 of the Traffic Signs Manual, which dictates the measures that we must use in temporary roadworks. But generally when we're doing roadworks, we're doing construction works. So they're also covered by, on the right hand side here, the construction regulations. So we have to take into account both of those industry codes of practice. Because there's two codes of practice to take into account, the Local Government Management Services Board got together and produced this guidance document, which I've introduced a few seconds ago, in order to interpret Chapter 8 and the construction regulations in the context of a construction project. So this document takes into account Chapter 8 design here in the context of the roles of the client, the PSDP and the PSCS. They may be terms that you are aware of. If you're not, just a quick overview. Client is the person who's paying for the job, basically, if you put it in layman's terms. The PSDP is responsible for ensuring that any designs on the construction project are carried out to safe standards, so that the job can be constructed safely and maintained safely. The PSCS is the person who's responsible for ensuring that any construction work is carried out safely on the project. From the construction regulations, we also have the CSCS training requirements, which are legal requirements for anybody carrying out specific construction activities. One of them includes the signing, lighting and guarding at roadworks course, which is a course which is now required by your man with the stop-go board in order to do that safely, and it's a 3-day course. The ones that I've highlighted in yellow here, they're the ones that have changed in 2010. We have a new guidance document, we have a new sign, lighting, guarding at roadworks course, and then we have the temporary traffic management design course, and they're the areas that I'm going to focus on for the presentation. That's the new guidance document, as I said, available for download. One of the things I want to point out about it is that different to the previous document, it specifies that it's a design document. It's for people who are doing design. Second thing worth pointing out in the title, which is different to the previous one, it specifies that it's for single carriageway roads only, so no dual carriageway measures are described within it. One of the important things along with it is the stamp at the bottom. So you can see I've highlighted it here. We have the Department of Transport, the HSA, which previously was not on this guidance document. They have now put their backing behind the recommendations within this code of practice. And then obviously we have the National Roads Authority and the LGMSB. It has a lot more detail within it than what was previously in the last guidance document. It specifies urban works. So previously we had no roundabouts described within it. It talks about pedestrian management, but it also puts a lot more emphasis on the roles and responsibilities of the designer of temporary traffic management, which is very important for any of you who take on this role or are about to take on that role in terms of liability. That's an example of one of the flow charts. So previously it was a little bit less clear in the old document. They've now described using a flow chart the responsibilities at the various stages within a construction project for temporary traffic management. One of the things that's very important to note for anybody who takes on the role of PSDP is that they are to coordinate any temporary traffic management designs which take place, even at construction stage. It's not something which project supervisors for the design process are aware of. Contractors are starting to pick up on this, and they're starting to ask for much more details than what's being provided by our typical PSDPs, because ultimately, if something happens on the site, it's found out that there was a problem with the design, it will now come back to the PSDP. It will fall on their head, and it very clearly states it within this document. One of the other paragraphs which I've taken out, which highlights again the importance of the preliminary traffic management plan and the role of the designer, is at construction stage. So it states that the implementation of the temporary traffic management plan is coordinated by the PSCS. It doesn't say it's designed, it's coordinated. The designer may be appointed during the construction stage. That's generally what's been happening up until this point. However, the designer is still a designer, and he must be coordinated by the PSDP. 9 times out of 10, this is not happening today in Ireland. And there's a few familiar faces who would be testament to the fact that they're not being provided with enough preliminary information by the PSDP about the designs for construction. Here's a few examples of the new junction guidance which is available within the guidance document. So previously, any of the documentation available from the Department of Transport showed perfect straight roads, nice, idealised situations. They're now beginning to recognise that those of us who are involved in design need temporary traffic management plans for roundabouts and junctions, not just straight sections. And we're very proud to say, from a company point of view, that the guidance which is now within this local authority document has been sourced from our temporary traffic management design course. So we've been involved in the consultation at this stage. Also, pedestrian management is given a much greater emphasis. I know as a temporary traffic management designer, one of the problems that I always hate to see coming up against me, I see some people here from local authorities, and they'll very well know that pedestrian management is one of the areas which is most difficult to control. You can control cars in lane closures on dual carriageways, no problem, but bring somebody with a buggy or a wheelchair or a small child and you've created a whole new set of hazards. So there's a lot more guidance now in terms of the dimensions which are recommended to provide to pedestrians. Let's take a look at those two photos there. I think you'd all agree that's something fairly typical of what you'll see around the towns and cities of this country. The footway is blocked by some roadworks, and if you're lucky you might have some barriers directing pedestrians into a temporary planned way. 9 times out of 10 there'll be no ramp for them. If there is a ramp, sometimes it'll be a bit of quick set tar, and the buggy user or the wheelchair user will be expected to navigate that ramp. So the new recommendation is, where possible and where practicable, that you provide a ramp at curb level to take the wheelchair or buggy user out at the same level as the curb, and they rotate at 90 degrees and travel along the pathway parallel to the curb. That's a recommendation, and I would be sacked and fired straight away if I didn't plug the fact that on our stand down there today you can see a prototype for one such product. So I'd like to invite you all down, have a look at it, we'll take your feedback. It is a prototype stages, but we would like to get your input at this stage because you are the people who are going to be using it and specifying it. So back to our chart. We're going to look at the changes now in the sign, light and guarding document. Just so you're aware, if any of your operatives or anyone you know is using the charts which were previously provided to them on the sign, light and guarding course, they are out of date. They're wrong. If you see anybody using the old charts, take it out of their hands. It's available now on the Department of Transport's website. We also have a copy of it down at the stand, so if anybody wants to get that from us, we have it also. But it is out of date, so just to be very aware of that. It also provides guidance on inspection stops, convoy operations, and again roundabouts. That's the new chart. A lot more colour, and we think it's a lot easier to read than the one that was previously available, but it's still a fairly complicated chart for some people to use. Inspection stops and surveys. This is specifically or very important for our local authorities who carry a lot of routine works and inspection stops. This is a diagram which was previously or not previously shown in any guidance document, and it's the use of a vehicle as a warning mechanism in front of an operative. It's in there within the sign, light and guarding. It's not within the guidance document, but used at extreme caution, because obviously it's a very dangerous situation to use a vehicle as a blocking mechanism for an operative in front. So I have risk assessment there in bold writing just to make sure that it's not used just for the sake of cost savings. It is to be used where it's practicable. Convoy operations, not previously covered in any other course. It's now described within the new sign, light and guarding course.